As we welcome you into America's Forum for this Tuesday, we take note of the vigil in Copenhagen, where an estimated 30,000 people gathered to commemorate victims of two shootings. This as heightened fears of a new surge in anti-Semitic violence grip Europe and, for that matter, the world. Meanwhile, after those attacks, a lot of people are asking, what is the nature of the threat here in the United States? For more on this developing story, we're pleased to be joined by famed attorney and Harvard Law professor Professor Dershowitz. He's on the phone from Miami. Alan is the author of Terror Tunnels, the case for Israel's just war against Hamas. He's also a blogger for our parent website, Newsmax.com. And as I mentioned, he's joining us from Miami. Up mighty early out in Los Angeles is Larry Elder, who will be here for the next hour. Gentlemen, to you both, we thank you for your time. And Alan, I want to get to the issue of Iran in just a few minutes. But first, could you talk about the threat we are seeing now, the rise in global anti-Semitism? Especially, we've seen it in France, and I know you were just in that nation.
I was there. I was all over Europe helping to commemorate the liberation of the death camps 70 years ago. And I think we have to be very, very clear. There is no increase generally in anti-Semitism in Europe. There is only an increase in Islamic extremist anti-Semitism. There is only one source of the anti-Semitism that really matters, and that is radical Muslims who believe there are two targets that are appropriate. People who have done them wrong specifically by making cartoons or whatever, and then Jews in general. Jews in general, no matter who you are, whether you're an elementary school student or you're attending a bat mitzvah or you're doing anything else or you're wearing a kippah, if you're a Jew, you're a target. The other time you're a target is if you do cartoons or do other kinds of things. Now, there is a little bit of right-wing anti-Semitism increasing in countries like Hungary, Greece, but it's not nearly as significant because it doesn't manifest itself in violence. The violent anti-Semitism is all coming from Islamic extremists. The President of the United States refuses to recognize that. He calls it a group of people who have attacked folks in a kosher, you can even say kosher, in a grocery store. But any person who has the ability to see right in front of his eyes understands this is extremist Islamic anti-Semitism. And by the way, it's not limited. Maybe the violence is limited to extremists, but the anti-Semitism is pervasive among certain Islamic communities in Europe, and it leads to the kind of violence that extremists engage in the name of Islam.
Alan, I've never seen such hostility coming from an administration towards Israel as I'm seeing today. One of my friends says that Obama has an inability to separate the arsonists from the firefighters. What do you think is the basis for Obama's hostility?
Well, first of all, Obama has been generally pretty good in relation to Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu has said that no president in modern times has provided more weaponry, more help during the various wars that Israel has fought. So it's a mixed picture. He's very strongly opposed to what Netanyahu is now doing in relation to Iran, and he's just dead wrong about that. Netanyahu has a perfect right to defend his country's existence by disagreeing with the president and going to Congress and telling the Congress to prevent a bad deal for America, for Israel, and for the world. But so I think the hostility is a mixed picture, and I don't necessarily buy the more general diagnosis that Obama is hostile to Israel or hostile to Jews. He's appointed more Jews to high positions in his administration than most previous presidents. So again, it's a very, very mixed picture. But I don't understand his hostility to Netanyahu. I don't understand his hostility to Congress.
And after all, Alan, you know, as a debater, the key in any discussion is an accurate definition of terms. The White House, when it came to the beheading of the 21 Coptic Christians, simply mentioned 21 Egyptian citizens. So you still have a problem coming to grips with that. But in the minute that remains, I want to talk about a new CNN poll indicating that 57% of Americans disapprove of how our president is handling the global threat of ISIS. 78% asked the president, approve of the president asking for an authorization of force. In your opinion, Alan, is America doing enough? 30 seconds.
Well, it's doing too much in some respects. That is, it's toadying up to Iran Iran needs us more than we need Iran to fight ISIS, and we shouldn't be compromising Iran's nuclear program in order to get them to fight ISIS. They have every motive to fight ISIS. So I think somehow the president is doing too much and too little at the same time.
And Alan, you mentioned Iran and what is transpiring there as we have those negotiations with the Iranian government. Tell you what, gentlemen, I'll ask you both just to stay right here. And you watching at home or wherever you're watching, please stay with us. We will continue the discussion with Alan Dershowitz and Larry Elder right after this on America's Forum.
These are important messages that the Congress needs to hear and the American people need to hear. And I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu is the perfect person to deliver the message of how serious this threat is.
Speaker John Boehner on Fox News Sunday reiterating the importance of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress scheduled for early March. And we should also take note of the fact that the Prime Minister was in the news saying if this emerging nuclear agreement with Iran is so good, why hide it? Why not publicize it? Let's continue the conversation now with attorney Alan Dershowitz, who's in Miami this morning, and political analyst and talk show host Larry Elder, who's Skyping in bright and early from Newsmax LA. Alan, the Prime Minister asks a question that is a pretty good one. If the deal is so good, why not talk about it?
I agree with that, and especially why keep it from Israel? Remember, the threat of the White House now is because President Obama doesn't like Netanyahu. He's not going to keep him in the loop as to how the progress of the negotiations are going. If the progress of the negotiations are going well and it's a good deal, you think the first person you'd want to tell is Benjamin Netanyahu. He then might go to Congress and say, hey, it sounds like a good deal. I'm on the president's side. But if they keep information from Israel, that just increases the likelihood that Israel may have to take military action. No country in the world is going to accept a nuclear-armed country next door that has threatened to destroy it over and over again. Look what we did in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Cuba hadn't threatened to destroy the United States, and yet when they got missiles close to the United States back in the early 1960s, we took whatever military action we had to prevent that from happening. Israel's going to do the same thing. And so I think the president is actually moving us closer to the need for military action of some kind, whether it be by Saudi Arabia, by Israel, by a combination of countries in the area that cannot tolerate a nuclear-armed Iran. I think the president's actions are moving us closer to war than away from it.
Alan, given that this is the administration that negotiated that bad Bo Bergdahl deal in exchange for those high-value terrorists, the same administration that negotiated the deal with the Castros, where, in my opinion, we got very little back. Aren't you worried that really what Obama wants is a nuclear-armed Iran that he believes naively that we can peacefully coexist with? Isn't that what Obama's real objective is?
Well, I sure hope not. I mean, he looked me in the eye in the Oval Office and said, Alan, you know me. I don't bluff. Iran will not develop nuclear weapons. And I hope he means that. What I'm afraid is that there are people in his administration who moved from a theory of no nuclear weapons to a theory of containment. And if it's true that the proposed deal on the table has a sunset clause that says that after a certain number of years, Iran will be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, if that's true, then Iran is already a nuclear power. As soon as that sunset clause is announced, then Saudi Arabia says, hey, it's only a matter of years. We're not going to wait until the rockets are pointed at us. And nuclear proliferation is beginning in the Middle East, and every oil-rich Arab country is going to try to join the nuclear club in order to prevent Iran from having a monopoly in that area of nuclear weapons among Muslim countries.
Alan and Larry, 2 minutes remain, and I would be remiss if I did not bring up the court case here domestically as a judge in South Texas, a federal judge, has blocked President Obama's executive action on immigration. I happen to think of it as amnesty. Alan, who is in the right on this question constitutionally from your vantage point?
You want to hear something very interesting? This relates to Iran in this way. What we're seeing is a great constitutional debate beginning to occur as to how powers are divided between the president and Congress. And in recent years, we've seen presidents taking all this power. The president has the decision to make on immigration. The president has the decision to make on Iran. And people are fighting back and saying, no, 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 this is divided. And what the court essentially is saying is, you know, we have a tripartite system of justice, and the judiciary checks the executive checks the legislature. And so this is a debate about separation of powers and checks and balances. In the end, it's an undecided issue, and the courts will decide. And I suspect the courts may weaken the executive authority.
Alan, 20 seconds left. How did the issue of immigration become a left, right, Republican, Democrat issue? Why isn't it just an issue of national security and what's best for our country?
Boy, that's the way it should be. Immigration is something that affects us all. You know, we're a country of immigrants. My family, many of them were saved from the Holocaust by America opening its doors. Too many were not saved by America not opening its doors.
Right.
But it should always be a bipartisan issue. Iran should be a bipartisan issue. Israel should be a bipartisan issue. But in America today, everything has become partisan, and we're the losers. The American people are the losers when issues that ought to be nonpartisan become partisan.
Not an issue of left and right, but of right and wrong. Alan Dershowitz, we thank you for the time. The title of Alan's book is Terror Tunnels, The Case for Israel's Just War Against Hamas. Again, our thanks to Alan Dershowitz for checking in from Miami, and Larry Elder will remain on standby out at Newsmax LA. When we come back, General Michael Hayden will talk about ISIS and more. Stay tuned.